Hey, welcome back, my amazing student. So in this lecture here, we're going to learn how Flask handles static files. And yes, in web frameworks, most of the time we're going to have the framework dealing with those files. Flask makes this very easy. Now, just like templates, Flask is expecting another folder for static files. And that folder name is actually static. All right, very simple. So I'm just going to create the static folder right here. And inside here, let's play around with CSS and let's see how that we can actually put CSS in our application with Flask. So I'm just going to do styles.css, and in here I'm just going to create some really basic rules here. I'm just going to say the BG, the background, blue. Maybe the color of the text would be white. Let me just make that not wheat. White is fine. All right. So if we wanted to use this, let's say in the home page, we'll create a link tag here, just like this. And inside this href, we're going to have to use Jinja. We're going to have to use a function called URL4. So we're going to do the curly braces, the double curly braces here. We're going to say URL underscore 4. And the first argument here would be the endpoint static. And the second argument would be the file name that we want to detect, which in this case is going to be styles.css. Simple as that. Now, if I go to home page and I refresh, you can see that that acts right away. That it's displayed right away. All right. So now we are handling static files. Now, you might be thinking, Edwin, you might be asking me somewhere, right, in the world, Edwin, what do you mean static? Is this the name of the folder here? Well, that's not the case. This is an endpoint. Let me show you what is considered an endpoint real quick. So let's go to app here. And let me give you an example real quick here. We can actually change this instead of going to the endpoint static. It can be going to another folder called public or something like that, right? So let's create another folder. And this is out of the scope of this lecture a little bit, but I want to give you an example here. So let's create another folder. I'm going to call this public. And inside here, I'm going to actually copy this real quick. Let me just copy this and paste it here. All right, and I'm going to change this to have a different color, maybe red, so that way we can tell which one is actually affecting, okay? And let's go back into the app right here, okay? Remember when I told you that this route method here has some extra parameters that we can pass in, right? Some extra arguments that we can pass in, right? One of them is endpoint. So if I wanted to, I could change the endpoint, let's say of homepage or about page to be something else. So I can just say endpoint and I'll give it the name I want. I could say about page, just like that. All right. And now, instead of when I use this function URL4, because I can use this function outside Jinja, right? When I use this URL4 somewhere, I'm not going to use it here, of course. I got to refer to this name now because this is the new endpoint, okay? Instead of being about, okay? We can change the endpoint by using this parameter here or this argument. So anyway. Right. So now what I can do is when I instantiate Flask in my application right here, I could change the endpoint. So the static folder, I could name it whatever I want. So for example, I have this first argument here, and I can pass in this first parameter. I can pass in the next one. It could be the static folder. And I can name it whatever I want. I'm going to name it public, just like that. Okay, so now when I come here and I refresh, you can see now that I'm taking styles now from the public folder because that's where I placed that red color. Okay, very simple. We have other ones like static URL path, we have static endpoint, and so on. All right, so we can change that here. We can change a couple different values there. I just wanted to show you that, guys, so that way you know exactly why we use the, let me just come back here. Why we use this first argument here for this function. All right, this is not just the folder, this is the endpoint, okay? I can change that when I instantiate Flask, but right now we can also change it here as well, right? We can say, hey, let's come back here. Let's go back into the static here, right? And I do this, and it goes back in there. But what happens when I do this? Watch this. Nothing happens. We get an error, right? Because we're not supposed to be changing it right here. Even if I said that a couple seconds ago, sorry about that, right? So this is not going to work because we have to set it in the when we instantiate this, and by default this is going to the static endpoint. Okay. Anyway, let's go back in here. Boom. All right, guys. Anyway, I wanted to show you that it's been a long time since I play around with this, since I'm already in a different level when it comes to Python, right? So I'm already using boilerplates. I'm using files already. I copy and paste a lot of my files already from existing applications, so I don't have to be going back and doing things like that. And plus, I use static all the time. I don't use public, all right? I don't use a folder name public when I'm using Flask, all right? I use all the defaults. It's very rare that I change, that I make something very custom when it comes to Flask, because most of the time I'm building stuff, you know, very fast, and I want to use all the defaults, right? So I don't have to be changing this later on when I'm using a different module. So it's better to leave things the way they are unless you really need to change it, okay? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you give some likes. Make sure you comment if you have a question. I'm here for you guys. Take care, and I'll see you on the next following lecture.